motherhood. 1 minute, you're mom of the year.
I love you, Mommy.
Then the next, not so much. From bath time to bullying, from potty training to puberty, parenting is full of challenges. But one thing is for certain, you are not alone. Welcome to Modern Mom Probs. I'm your host, author, mother, parenting expert, Tara Clark. Join me while we tackle today's modern mom problems. Neha, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's such a delight.
I'm so excited that you're here. And I'm going to mention this, that we just got off the phone. I don't know if I should say it like that. We just got off of an Instagram Live, and Neha was interviewing me about my professional pause from Nickelodeon before I started Modern Mom Probs. And so now we're going to shine the light on you. So tell us a little bit about yourself. You single-handedly, I have to say this before we get into it, you single-handedly started the conversation about career pauses in women and mothers. I don't know anyone that ever put words to it the way that you and your team at Mother Untitled did.
Oh, that's so kind and generous. I do think that when I started Mother Untitled in 2017, I launched it January 10th, 2017, but I'd been doing some diligence before. I'd had my son in 2016. It was on the heels of the Lean In movement and the girl boss era. And there was no platform at the time speaking to women on career pauses in a way that was dignified. Right.
Mm-hmm.
We had an incredible movement celebrating women achieving great success in the traditional construct of the workplace, but we'd sort of left the quote unquote stay-at-home mother back in the 1970s with apron strings and June Cleaver. And I was meeting so many incredible women like you, Tara, but, in my own neighborhood, as well as having my own lived experience of having accrued an education and work experience that I was proud of, and making a very conscious choice, because I had the privilege to make that choice, to pause or downshift at that time for more room for motherhood, and still have an equitable relationship with my partner, and still believe that I had a long career ahead of me. And I really wanted a platform that spoke to women in that way and gave women the language to speak about that stage of their life.
Yes.
In a similar way. So thank you for seeing me. Thank you for seeing the work. It has been a long 7 years, but I'm excited about where we are.
And where you're going.
Thank you. Yes.
It's because you have a book coming out next year. So I feel like now that's really going to crack this conversation wide open.
I think so. And that's a big goal of the book, is really, I think we've done a lot of work in sort of slowly and steadily building a community and a movement rooted in language and reframes, and then the content that you see that my team curates on the site. And I think the book allows us to propel the movement forward in such a big way by really saying to the world, it's time that we all re-examine the tropes around what it means to be a woman and take care of family for a chapter, and to know that a career pause is not a career ender, because I think for too long we've sort of counted out the stay-at-home mother.
Absolutely. When I left Nickelodeon to stay home with Jack full time, two things happened. One, at first I felt very guilty, because I thought like you said, I went to college and I have an MBA and all of those things, and all of the work experience behind that, you just assume well, now that I'm a mom, I'm going to keep working. And living in New York City at the time, you felt this sort of societal pressure just to keep going the same way as if you always had. And then two, the other, on the other flip side of that coin was that once he was born and I wasn't working full time for an organization, it was so freeing to be Tara as an individual and not Tara as her work title or the company that she works for. And that was a really big mind trip for me, because so often you introduce yourself as, I'm Tara, I work at Nickelodeon, or, I'm Julie, I am an attorney. And that's they go part and parcel together when you're at a cocktail party, when you're meeting people for the first time. And when you're a mom in your home, then it sort of shifts to, I'm Jack's mom. Or, and so that sort of shifts. But even before I got to the point where I was introducing myself as Jack's mom, there was that time where I was Tara, just Tara.
And sitting in the discomfort of that. I think many women come to Mother Untitled. And by the way, that's the origin of the phrase untitled. It was really this idea of two things. One, the ego, the identity, the transformation that happens when you part with your career title in a culture that puts so much weight and emphasis on that. And then the part two is sort of navigating this really untitled in between of these antiquated notions of stay at home and working. Right. We were just speaking about existing in the in-between in this untitled space. And there is, I love that you talk about that as such an empowering moment, because that's obviously what we want to shift the conversation to. But for a lot of women, when they come to us, it's very daunting. It's very discombobulating when you have achieved so much worth from the salary you're making, from where you are on the career ladder, and to have to actually sort of distinguish, well, who am I? Instead of what do you do? And I don't think we are going to get to a culture at any time soon that doesn't ask what do you do as a real opener. And now the thing we can change is helping women to stand in their power and in their confidence when they respond to that, no matter whether they work for pay or work unpaid in the home or exist somewhere in between.
Yes. Why is it so important to do this rebranding? Why did you feel the need that you're like, I need to put words behind this movement to help these mothers?
Because more women than not are feeling a call to make room for family life, because family life is getting more and more demanding in this generation, and joyful and demanding. Right. And so if we're looking at a generation of men and women, by the way, but let's focus on women because I think that it's a very nuanced conversation, are choosing to pause or downshift. If we don't update the perception of that time spent in the home focused on family life as the incredible leadership training ground that it is, then those same women feel unsupported and disrespected and unseen, and then they're penalized when and if they're ready to transition back. And like I said, you're looking at a generation of women who are so different than the generations prior, in part because of the intellectual labor that parenting demands, in part because they're getting married and having children later at the average age of 30. So they have accrued education and work experience to draw upon. And we have an incredible access to digital tools and opportunities like the ones you talk about, right? That inspire and ignite creativity, allow you to, stay connected to professional and personal pursuit. So this is just a very different generation of women that are navigating the gray area, are wanting to make room for family life more often than not, and don't want to be penalized or counted out.
Yeah. It's funny, in the timing is wild. Just this morning, I was on Instagram, and my friend Nikki Marie, I don't know if you're familiar with Nikki's work. She is hilarious.
Yes.
She had posted a story, not a story, well, it was a reel. She had posted a reel talking about her former career versus staying home and working from home with her kids. And in it, she essentially was saying, because I think it was a remix from someone else's like TikTok, and they were saying like, would you rather be a stay-at-home mom, or would you rather have a $250,000 annual salary outside of the home? And what Nikki was saying is that she's had both. She has worked out of the home making, 250 plus, and she had housekeepers, and she said gardeners and plowers and, all the people, meal prep, all that stuff. And she had to miss recitals, and she had to miss other family obligations. And now she has flexibility in what she does as a content creator. And she's able to pick her kids up from school and go to recitals and tuck them in at night. And she said the other big thing was that, when you're in your fancy pants career, you think that you are irreplaceable. And when it became apparent to her was when, after she had her second child, and she realized, oh gosh, like they obviously replaced me during my maternity leave. And now that I'm coming back, they really don't seem to need me in the way that I thought that they needed me. But you know who does need me? My two children at home. And so
Mm-hmm.
she made obviously the conscious effort to leave her corporate career behind to pursue being a content creator. But I just thought it was interesting that I saw that video just this morning, and she was talking about, you think everyone at work needs you, and they can't do this project without you. And ultimately, guess what? They can. They usually find a way.
What you're commenting on is also this like incredible wave that has happened. And we've watched it. I started 7 years ago. Just in the last 3 years post-pandemic, there's such a re-examination. It's, yes, the pandemic, where I think we all had an understanding of how much effort
Yes.
parenting takes. We had a window into what it could be like if for work and life to be more integrated.
Mm-hmm.
And layoffs started happening, and we started to understand, wait a second, our work families are not really our families.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of that sort of collision, that trifecta, has really changed this conversation in such a big way. I'll tell you, when I started Mother Untitled, and I was really committed to this sort of rebranding the stay-at-home mother empire and nearing this new language, no one was really that receptive about covering it in the media, because it did
Mm-hmm.
feel, and I heard this a lot, anti-feminist, quote unquote,
Mm-hmm.
because at that time, feminism was equated to financial power and attaining equal standing in the career, and the traditional workplace. And anything different than that felt contradictory. We are now seeing this huge shift and re-examination of, well, what does it mean to actually not be the exact same as men, but actually start to create systems and language that works for us as women, because we are different. And I think that is a really interesting moment to be in, because you're starting to see really feminist, strong, career-driven, successful women start to say, well, wait a second, I want to make different choices, so let's re-examine the whole thing.
Absolutely. Let's re-examine the whole thing. And also too, like, our children are young for such a short period of time, right? Like,
Mhm.
and I hate when people are always like, well, you only get them for 18 years. Like, well, yes and no, because they're our children for the rest of our lives and their lives. But if we have the privilege, and I know you speak a lot about this, there are two things that go with it. It's the choice and the privilege to be able to take that career pause. It's wonderful to be able to do so, because you do want to be there to experience a lot of their firsts, and to be able to really savor their childhood as much as one can.
And I had a 50-year-old write me the other day, because she said, is it weird that I want to take a career pause now? My son's 17, but needs me.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, it's not at all weird,
No.
because there are different demands at different seasons. And sometimes you can give more to your career and give more to your professional pursuit, or give more to your community or your activism or your marriage. And sometimes your kids need more.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. I'm hearing more and more women say, I'm not actually pausing to savor the baby years, or it's not right after I have a child, but it's actually, oh my gosh, they're so delicious at 3, or the transition to 2 is so demanding, or tweens are just like the Sephora and the TikTok are driving like, I need to be there, so they don't spend, so all of these different things are sort of upending this idea of it all being so, even quote unquote career pauses or stay-at-home motherhood isn't as black and white. It comes in different seasons. It's more fluid. Women are sort of dialing up their other things on the other side more than ever. And so it's exciting to start to look at a more nuanced, nonlinear view of things.
It absolutely is. Because I think to myself too, my son is 11 now. And, what is my career going to look like as he becomes a teenager? And so that's something that's on my mind as well.
Right. And I think one of the things that's interesting talking to you is when our platforms are when our professional pursuit becomes so integrated with our life, it's a blessing,
Mm-hmm.
and it becomes a different nut to crack in terms of, well, how does it grow with us and for us, and how do we detach from it at times. And I think that's going to be a really new sort of next frontier as you see sort of this rise of women existing in this gray area where we have figured out a way to make work alongside motherhood through content creation, through small business, through freelance, through consulting. I think this sort of next frontier is, okay, well, how do we figure out how to support the quote unquote working stay at home mother, right? These women who have their hands in both, because unfortunately the default often becomes, and this is a trope I hear all the time from women on career pauses, if we're not working for pay or a lot of pay, we don't deserve help. It is very hard to do motherhood on its own without help, let alone motherhood combined with trying to keep yourself whole and healthy, your marriage whole and healthy, your projects or small businesses or big businesses healthy. And so that's a really interesting piece of this conversation.
It certainly is. You mentioned tropes. I want to sort of dive into that a little bit. What are some of the tropes that are holding women back in this sphere?
Well, I think I want to start with this idea that you brought up, which is that I am not feminist, I'm not modern. My identity of being both of those things is wrapped up in my professional pursuit, right? No, you are still ambitious if you choose to trust your career and trust your own growth alongside motherhood and trust that you will be able to transition back to work and meeting on the other side. So that's part one. Part two, I think, and we get into a lot of these in the book, so I'll sort of skim the top few. The financial piece is huge, right? I think one of the things that's scariest for women is, am I becoming a dependent? I've worked for 10 years to be independent. Am I becoming dependent? No. If you are doing unpaid labor in the home that allows your partner to be able to single task outside of the home, then they are actually equally dependent on you. And so by that regard, it's an interdependent organization, right? Yes, your household might depend on one partner for pay, and the other partner is depending on the person working in the home to keep the family going and growing. And so that's an interesting paradigm. And it's important because it really empowers women to be able to say, this is a joint family decision. This is not just for me. And it empowers women to also go in knowing they can invest in themselves along the way. And I think that lends to sort of other conversation, which is one of the primary, that if I am doing this, it means that this is my 24/7 job and I can't have help. Now, there is no way we should have a world where anyone should work a 24/7 job. And motherhood is one of the most demanding jobs. And I think we really put so much of our family, we ran a survey with Proof Insights of 1,200 stay-at-home mothers across the country. And in it, we found that only 4% reported their own health and wellness as a measure of success. That's tied with a clean home. And so the fact that, but by the way, we rank our children's health and wellness as being the primary success metric, which of course, but it does demand the question, how do we raise mentally and physically well children if we are not mentally and physically well?
Exactly.
Right. So all of these things are looped together, and there's sort of other tropes we sort of dismantle in the book and through the community around your career pause is not a career ender. It is not a life pause. You are still growing and thriving, and there is sort of a next chapter ahead of you. So, but I think those sort of first few around identity, finances, and support are really interesting.
Those are all things that I think I've struggled with myself. So I don't feel alone now in that.
Same. And I think identity is such an interesting one because to your point, you started the conversation talking about, hi, I'm Tara, I work at Nickelodeon. Think about what Nickelodeon signifies. I'm cool, I'm in media, I'm well connected, I'm creative. We take all of these signifiers of who we are and we attach it to one pithy phrase. And the work of having to say, I am still all of those things independent is really big work, but it can, if you spend the time with it, really unlock so much potential.
So much of it. Oh gosh, I love that. And I still wish I was as cool as I was 10 years ago when I worked in Nickelodeon.
Much cooler, in my opinion.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. There's so many things I want to ask you because there's so I love this conversation for so many reasons. One, no one else is talking about it except for you and your team at Mother Untitled. And so it's original to me on the podcast to be talking about this. And these are things that, like I said, I felt this 12 years ago when I decided to stay home with my son. And there was so much guilt that went into it, and even thinking, I'm staying at home, I shouldn't get a babysitter. I'm staying at home, I shouldn't get a housekeeper. And luckily we were in the position to be able to do those things. And it made all the difference for my own mental health.
In mental health, I think, is also rooted in community, right? We know that 1 in 10 per the survey, women don't feel they have mom friends, really don't believe they have mom friends, and find it much harder than they believed it to be to make those. But in reality, a lot of that is feeling like they don't have time to nurture those. And so all of it sort of comes back to this feeling of like a time scarcity and not having margin for themselves. And I think a lot of it also comes back to feeling like the entire proof of my worth. Now, if my worth was tied to my work outside of the home, now it's tied to raising these children, and my children are the benchmark of my success, which is also a flawed metric, right?
Sure, yeah.
And so I think it's really, and with the book, a lot of the intention is to guide women so that they can walk into it with sort of a clarity of mind that this chapter, while it may seem like it's entirely about your kids, is also about you.
Very much so. And
in making room for family life, you can strategically, even if you can't afford sort of a full, a full roster of support, you can still make this a supportive stage of life for you. And sort of go into it intentionally.
Yeah. Intentionality is everything. I think that's key.
Which you brought up earlier, actually, when you were talking about, I asked you, how do you manage growing a platform through all of the noise, through all of the clutter over the years, over the sort of blocks that come up with family life? And you said, well, it's the ultimate privilege. And I do think if it, you said the word before, and it's worth saying again, I think that phrase, I get to do this. I think so much of it is deciding and committing. I get to focus on this for right now. I choose to let go of this other piece. And I sort of trust that this is a long game and I'll be reevaluating over and over. And I think that lends to whether you're holding on to a business alongside family life, or you're on full pause, or you're also in a full-on sprint. I do feel a little bit like I'm in a sprint right now, which is quite odd.
Well, you are, because of the book and everything that's going to come with that.
Yeah, and it's different. I mean, I still sort of clock off when the kids are home at 4, but it's different. It's very different. And I have to remind myself, and I crave the simplicity of sort of fully being at home. I really loved that phase of life and sort of the creativity that came with it. And I remind myself a lot of times that this is just one season and I can sort of revisit over and over.
I think that's the biggest thing about motherhood, because even last year, 2 years ago, I was the PTA president. So I was running Modern Mom Probs, being a full-time mom, doing that. In my town, the PTA has a huge operating budget. I don't want to share what it is. A huge operating budget. It was practically like a full-time job on top of that. And that was another thing that I was like, how did I get here? I'm the type of I always say yes for the most part. And so there I was for 2 years, like running this massive PTA and all of the stuff that comes into work. And so that time was a sprint. That was a full out sprint. And now I'm happy to say that I'm no longer the head of the PTA, and my life tends to be a little bit quieter now. And so I am able to focus on my family more and work, or just myself. And so you're right. Things come in seasons. Everything comes in a season.
Though it's interesting, one of the most popular reframes, I always push it out right before. I know you and I talk about repurposing content sometimes, so I'm not ashamed to say I always run it like right before back to school. And I always say, just because you're on a career pause for family life does not mean you have to say yes to every volunteer job, right? Like,
Yes.
you know,
Yes.
and I think there's a lot of people who assume, well, you're available, you should do it.
Mhm.
And it can be very challenging to navigate that and to say no, and to say, no, I'm actually putting my time toward this other thing. But it's all to say, volunteerism, it can be an incredible gift. It can, I often say, like, it's a great way to keep yourself connected. If you are
Mhm.
fully on a pause, it's a great way to keep your skills sharp. It often lives on people's resumes now, and it's a huge time suck. I am
It's
talking
all of those things, everything that you said there. It is wonderful to be connected with your community. It's wonderful to do philanthropic work, and it is very time consuming.
You know, it's interesting. My best friend from home, who lives in New Jersey as well, she had young kids at the time, and she took the CFO, the volunteer CFO position of her co-op, her preschool co-op.
Mhm.
Now, she did not realize, and she had no childcare. It was a 20-hour-a-week position. She ended up, though, while she was very happy to demote herself at the end of the year, she is now getting her CFA license because she thinks accounting, she got a lot of joy from accounting. She was a teacher beforehand. She was
That's
not,
amazing.
yeah, she was not even peripherally associated with accounting. And she found a real joy in managing the books. And I always loved that story. I interviewed someone else similarly who sort of did a lot of different volunteering to sort of figure out, oh, what of this was interesting, and it ended up being sort of organizing her school benefit. And she ended up, 5 years later, going into events after a job in technology. So it does have its upside. I don't want to be down on
Yes. No, it
volunteering.
definitely does. And I love it. I was just saying that at the time, excuse me, it was a full-fledged sprint for me, but I love PTA. I love volunteering. I wouldn't have been doing it for as long as I did. And the other interesting thing too is the majority of parents involved in the senior board of the PTA are working mothers.
Hmm.
It is split between maybe 50-50 working moms and stay-at-home moms. And the ones that were working moms have PhDs, they're doctors, they're therapists, they're very busy, and they're cutting, into their, let's say, um, patient time to be able to volunteer for this. And then my other friends who are stay-at-home moms currently, they, are also PhDs who are taking a career pause to be able
Hmm.
to be with their children full time. And so it's just interesting to see the spectrum of people involved in these volunteer positions. It's not all just like one thing. Does that make
Hmm.
sense? It's not all just
Yes.
like a stereotypical people think like, oh, the PTA, it's just like this. It's like, no, you know what? They're doctors, they're lawyers, they are accountants, they are events people, they are literally everybody.
Hmm. Well, what I love about that, I ran an article in Romper, maybe it was last year, and the title was "Dear Working Mother, Ask Me About My Day." Signed a stay-at-home mother. Because some of these titles have separated us when we're actually more alike than we're not, right? Like, I was
Mm-hmm.
actually going to ask you, Tara, which
Yeah.
one do you identify with? Because in theory, you're both, right?
Yes, I am.
And yes, you have flexibility, but you are fully working on building a really significant, impactful, profitable platform. And so, as we sort of this space in between grows and expands, I think that fluidity has the power to sort of dismantle these sort of power chasms that have kept us apart. And really, the quote unquote mommy wars were a fiction of media.
Mm.
Media loves a catfight. And we really sort of glommed onto, oh, these women are over here in their power suits and these women are in their aprons. And let's create a world in which one is doing something in service of their family and one is doing something in service of, feminism. And, they illustrated all these sort of divisive ideals when in reality, first of all, there was so much shifting, and continues to be so much shifting, where someone takes a career pause and then re-enters someone's existing sort of in a part-time schedule. And that always existed. And now that we all have voices and platforms, we're shining a light on that and saying, wait a second, no, that divided us. And I think this idea that we can also support one another in recognizing how much each other is holding, so that the woman who has more flexibility can support the woman who doesn't in a season, and or the woman who is sort of more connected to the workforce can help, mentor the one who's transitioning back down the line. There's so much opportunity if we can sort of step over those divisive lines.
Absolutely. 1,000% yes. And what you were saying too about, the seasons of motherhood is like, not everyone may be working their corporate job for, and I'm just saying this, 50 years straight, right? And not everyone may be staying home with their children for their children's entire lives. Even my grandmother, I'm just sort of like thinking about examples in the back of my head. My grandmother in the 50s stayed home with my mom and her brothers. And then when they were teenagers, she got a job.
Yeah.
And so it's nothing is forever, is my point there.
My mother likes to say, and I know your mom's your biggest cheerleader too. So is mine. And except she likes to say, she's like, I invented this before you ever did. She's like, yes, I took a pause. And then I would volunteer. She would ride the school bus with me because we'd immigrated from India, and it was new. She would go with me every day. She was the ESL teacher, and then she was the librarian. She was always involved. And then when I was 11, and back then you left 11-year-olds at home.
Yes.
By themselves. I wish we still did that, but we'll see. And she went back to work part-time, and she built an incredible community through her work life. So they just visited her the other day in New York, where we live. And, she really did feel like she didn't have the language about the gray area or existing in between, but she lived that, right? Coaching her partner through building his business. And I think if we look back and women had the power to shine a light on that part of their story, you would see many more examples of it.
And I'm so grateful for those women, like your mother.
My mother-in-law likes to say she did too. But yeah.
We'll give her credit for that too.
Yeah.
So one thing I wanted to ask you, Mother Untitled obviously has an Instagram account, but it's so much more than that. What are some of the offerings within the company?
So I'm so glad you asked, because I think when people see the social, they see my thought leadership, which is, I'm so proud to have been able to play with my love language, which is words, and share that with women and share my overthinking about this with women. But when you come to the site, there's the free resources, which are the library of expert curated content across a variety of stages, from preparing to pause to returning to the workforce to the sort of in between. And then a newsletter, which is a cheat sheet to simplify and elevate the week ahead. And then there's the other side, which is the resources that really help women unlock the full potential and possibility of this stage of life. So there's a Flex Jobs board that allows, a variety of curated opportunities for work that works alongside motherhood. So for the women who do want to hold a little bit of professional pursuit alongside family life, there's an expert Rolodex of a curated list of coaches across relationships, finances, parenting, parental leave, so that women have a curated list of women who have lived experiences and respect for career pauses. And it's a non-judgmental space for them to bounce ideas, get guidance. We have a toolkit of downloads from everything from scripts to have a conversation with your partner to share the load, to babysitters and hiring flexible childcare. And we're about to roll out, very excitingly in May, a directory for women to be able to actually connect with one another and trade opportunities.
That's fantastic. Congratulations on that. That's awesome. And you have the book coming out in January.
And we have the book coming out January 14th, 2025. It's called The Power Pause, and it's a guide, through the arc of preparing to pause and planning for it, stepping into it with empowerment, and then transitioning back with confidence.
Amazing. Do you talk about some of the skills that we gain as mothers that one can use back in the workforce?
Yes. I mean, I think one of the most interesting parts, I think there's the hard skills, which everyone talks about, right? And I believe that's chapter 8, which is the, sort of personal growth and exploration. So there's the leadership skills for sure, creativity, patience, organization, communication. And then there's this really interesting thing that you and I have sort of circled around, which is also the permission when you let go of the ego and identity that comes with your traditional titles and work trajectory, to explore what is work of meaning, to have conversations and really open conversations, to dabble in interesting things, to take the time to audit. If I was to spend time, what would I be spending time on? And so the combination, I think, of the skill development as well as the time to explore is really makes that chapter in particular an interesting one.
I can't wait to read it. It's going to be so good.
You.
I'm so excited.
I'm so excited about it too.
I ask this of all of my guests. What do you think is currently the biggest modern mom problem out there right now?
Comparison. I think it is. I think that our social media feeds, and I love Instagram. I credit it with this movement. I credit it with so many of these wonderful friendships like the one I have with you. And yet the way that we consume content right now is we look at one woman who might be serving frozen chicken nuggets, but she's doing incredible art projects. And another one who has, a messy corner of her house, but she's a really fabulous cook. And so then we compile all of these things to create a composite without understanding the full picture.
Yes.
And if we look at the full picture, then we'd understand everyone's giving on something. Everyone's choosing to focus on other things. And so the best way to sort of turn that on its head is to sort of hold the bigger picture of, well, what might they be giving on in the background? And we sort of have to rewire ourselves to enjoy the content, enjoy the inspiration, but sort of hold the full picture and compare ourselves only to our own metrics. But I think until we sort of retrain our minds to do that, we are holding ourselves to ideals where we are expected to sort of do it all when really we need to be defining our all for ourselves.
Beautifully said. Beautifully
Thank
said.
you.
Where can we find you online? Where can we learn more about you?
Well, you can follow us at Mother Untitled on Instagram. You can follow me at Neha Ruch on LinkedIn, or you can subscribe to the newsletter on motheruntitled.com.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for sharing more about the movement.
I'm so grateful for your support. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Modern Mom Probs. I hope you enjoyed our deep dive in today's problem with me, your host, Tara Clark. Join me next time when I'll be interviewing another great guest and tackling another modern mom problem. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave us a review and a rating. As always, you could head over to Modern Mom Probs on Instagram and give me a follow, or check out my book, Modern Mom Probs, A Survival Guide for 21st Century Mothers, available online wherever books are sold. Well, that's it for today. See you next time, folks.